The text message arrived while I was reviewing tenant applications at my office. Family Thanksgiving at our house this year. 4 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. Margaret. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had a way of turning every invitation into a summons. After 3 years of marriage to her daughter Emily, I'd learned that family gatherings were less about gratitude and more about establishing pecking orders within the Collins family hierarchy. I locked my desk drawer containing lease agreements for my 30 for rental properties and headed home to pick up Emily. She was waiting in our modest apartment, looking beautiful in the burgundy dress she'd chosen specifically because it makes Mom happy when I make an effort. Ready for the annual interrogation? Emily asked, only half joking as we drove toward her parents' suburban neighborhood. I've survived 2 years of it. I think I can handle one more. What Emily didn't know, what none of her family knew, was that I own the property management company that handled house, along with dozens of others throughout the city. Sterling Property Management had been quietly successful for 6 years, but I preferred keeping my business private. It eliminated complications in personal relationships and allowed me to assess people's character without the filter of their financial motivations. The Collins family had always been status conscious in a way that felt performative. Margaret worked as a bank teller, but spoke as if she were a regional manager. Emily's father, Robert, managed a small auto parts store, but presented himself as a business owner. Emily's brother Derek was a part-time personal trainer who described himself as a fitness entrepreneur. They lived in a rented 4-bedroom house in an upscale neighborhood, driving leased cars and maintaining appearances that required constant financial juggling. None of this was inherently problematic, except for their need to position themselves as superior to anyone they perceived as less successful. Since I appeared to be a regular property management employee living in a small apartment, I'd become their favorite example of insufficient ambition and limited prospects. We arrived at 4:03 p.m. to find cars already filling the driveway. Derek's leased BMW and Patricia's nearly new Lexus, cousin Brandon's lifted truck. I parked my reliable Honda Civic behind the garbage cans, maintaining my role as the family's cautionary tale. There's the renter, Derek announced as we entered the foyer, his voice carrying the fond condescension reserved for amusing family failures. Still living in that tiny apartment downtown. Still enjoying the convenience of urban living, I replied, hanging my coat in the closet. Margaret emerged from the kitchen wearing the forced smile she reserved for greeting people she tolerated rather than welcomed. James, so good of you to join us. Emily, darling, you look lovely. The message was clear. Emily was family. I was a guest whose attendance was noted rather than celebrated. The house smelled like turkey and Margaret's signature passive aggression. Family members clustered in the living room catching up on gossip and comparing recent purchases. The conversation followed predictable patterns. Who'd gotten promoted? Who'd bought new cars? Who was planning expensive vacations? Brandon just put an offer on a house. And Patricia announced proudly. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, beautiful neighborhood. Brandon beamed at the recognition. At 28, he'd finally scraped together a down payment for a starter home, an achievement the family was treating as evidence of superior life planning. That's wonderful, Emily said genuinely. Home ownership is such an important milestone. Exactly, Margaret interjected, shooting a meaningful look in my direction. Building equity instead of throwing money away on rent. Creating stability for the future. I nodded politely, having learned defending renting as a valid lifestyle choice only provided fuel for lectures about real estate investment and building generational wealth. Derek joined the conversation with the enthusiasm of someone who'd watched several property investment YouTube videos. The thing about renting is you're basically paying someone else's mortgage. You're making them rich while building nothing for yourself. It's fine for college students, Robert added, but eventually you need to think about building something permanent. I sipped my beer and maintained neutral expression, curious about where this was heading. The family's financial advice sessions were always entertaining, especially since their own fiscal decisions suggested limited understanding of wealth-building strategies. Dinner was served with the usual production, Margaret's best china, carefully arranged place cards, formal dining room reserved for special occasions. I found myself seated between Emily and her 12-year-old cousin, safely away from the adults' table where important family business was discussed. The meal progressed through standard holiday conversation topics, work updates, neighborhood gossip, political opinions carefully modulated to avoid genuine disagreement. But as the wine flowed and comfort levels increased, the conversation inevitably turned to the subject Margaret had clearly been preparing all evening. "James," she said during a lull in conversation, "Emily mentioned you're still renting that little apartment downtown. Have you given any thought to buying a place?" The question wasn't casual inquiry. It was the opening salvo in a coordinated campaign. I could see Emily tense beside me, anticipating the familiar pattern of her family's helpful advice. "We've discussed it," I said diplomatically. "The apartment meets our needs right now. But it's so small," Margaret continued. "And expensive, I'm sure. Downtown rent prices are outrageous. You could probably get a mortgage payment for less than what you're paying in rent." Derek nodded sagely. "Plus, you'd be building equity instead of just throwing money away." Robert joined the offensive. "A man needs to think about providing stability for his wife. Emily deserves a real home, not some temporary rental situation." I felt Emily's hand touch mine under the table. A small gesture of support that reminded me why I tolerated these gatherings. "Real estate is the foundation of financial security," Aunt Patricia added. "People who rent their whole lives never build wealth." Margaret's expression suggested this was exactly the opening she'd been waiting for. "That's what worries me about Emily's future. She's 32 years old, married to someone who doesn't seem interested in building anything permanent." The room fell quiet except for the soft clink of silverware against china. Even the 12-year-old seemed to sense that adult drama was unfolding. "Mom," Emily said quietly, "James and I are happy with our living situation." "Happiness doesn't pay for retirement, sweetheart. Your father and I worked hard to build equity in our home. We understand the importance of real estate investment." The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife, considering they were renting the house where this conversation was taking place. But family mythology often superseded actual facts. "Maybe James doesn't understand how real estate works," Derek suggested with the condescending helpfulness of someone explaining simple concepts to slow children. "I could show you some properties in our price range. Nothing fancy, but starter homes that would get you building equity." "Our price range," I repeated quietly. "Well, realistic options for someone in property management. Entry-level stuff." Robert cleared his throat importantly. "The thing is, James, our daughter deserves better than a renter. She grew up in a family that values ownership, stability, building something lasting." Margaret nodded emphatically. Emily could have married any number of successful men. Doctors, lawyers, business owners. Men who understand the importance of providing security. Instead, she continued building momentum for her prepared speech. She chose someone who seems content with temporary arrangements. I looked around the table at faces that ranged from sympathetic embarrassment to eager anticipation of my response. Emily's eyes were bright with angry tears she was too polite to shed in front of her family. "I understand your concerns," I said carefully. "You want Emily to be financially secure." "Exactly," Margaret said, mistaking my acknowledgement for agreement. "We want her to have the kind of life she deserves. The kind of life we've worked to provide." Which is why Robert added, "We hope you'll seriously consider making some changes. Emily's not getting any younger, and if you want children someday, children need stability," Margaret interrupted. "They need to grow up in homes their parents own, in neighborhoods with good schools, with the security that comes from building equity." Derek was nodding like this was the wisest financial advice ever dispensed. "It's really just about priorities, man. Do you want to spend your whole life making other people rich, or do you want to build something for your own family?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel the family's collective expectation that I would either defend my rental lifestyle or promise to change my obviously flawed approach to financial planning. "You're right about priorities," I said finally. "Building security for Emily is definitely important to me. Margaret's expression brightened, mistaking my agreement for capitulation. I'm so glad you understand. We were beginning to worry that you didn't take these things seriously. Oh, I take real estate very seriously, I assured her. Good, Robert said, because a man who can't provide basic home ownership isn't ready for marriage, in my opinion. A renter will always be at someone else's mercy, Aunt Patricia added. Landlords can raise rent, refuse to renew leases, sell properties. Tenants have no control over their housing situation.